Disclaimer. Harry Potter belongs to you-know-who. No, not him. The other you-know-who. George, Fred, Ron, and Ginny were appropriately horrified by the idea of Horcruxes, but they didn't seem to be as concerned about the prophecy. Though Ginny still clung to Harry tightly when she heard it, she admitted it wasn't entirely unexpected. "It's kind of like we already knew, isn't it?" she said. "How he keeps coming after you. You've had to face him almost every year. I sort of figured it wouldn't stop until until one of you—" "It's all right, Ginny," Harry said as she held him closer. "I felt the same way. He's not going to stop coming after me, and I've always wanted to end him if I could, so it doesn't really change anything." "But now you know you can do it," Ron pointed out. "Do you have any idea what the power he knows not is?" "No," Harry said. "Dumbledore thinks it's love. Yeah, I know, but Hermione says it could be some kind of spell she invents and teaches me." The Weasleys all turned and stared in surprise at Hermione. "What?" she said. "The prophecy didn't say it has to be some kind of superpower. It just has to be something that Harry knows and Voldemort doesn't." "Ha, that's my girl," George said. "There's always a loophole to these things, isn't there?" "Do you really think that's it?" Ginny asked. "There's a bunch of other things it could be." Hermione wasn't so sure. "Are there? You didn't see Voldemort dueling Dumbledore at the Ministry. I thought wizards that powerful only existed in legends. Raw power isn't going to win this." "Oh," she said, disappointed. "Harry," Ron said, "this is going to sound nuts, but do you think it could be that weird connection you've got with you-know-who?" "What?" Harry and Ginny said in unison, and Ginny added, "Ron, Harry just spent half the year learning how to block that out." "I know, but mate, you saw what the snake was doing and saved Dad. I know you needed to stop it to keep you-know-who from controlling you, but what if, now that you know that occlumency stuff—" Harry considered that, but he shook his head. "That sounds nice, but Dumbledore didn't say anything about that, and he definitely would have if it were useful." "He'd probably say it's still too dangerous," Hermione said firmly. "I'd bet Voldemort is better at occlumency than you are, and he could get into your head again that way." She trailed off. Suddenly, that nagging feeling in the back of her mind twinged much harder. Pieces started to fall into place, but she couldn't believe the conclusion. "No, surely not," she whispered. "What?" Harry asked. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "That didn't sound like nothing," Ginny said shrewdly. "It's not important. I was thinking about something else." She got up to go. "Where are you going?" "I just need to go think for a minute, okay?" she snapped. She hurried off before any of them could follow her. She finally found a place where she could stop and think in peace. She didn't want to even hint at it to her friends until she could process it. She didn't want to believe the conclusion her mind was coming to. Did it really even fit the facts? She thought back to what Dumbledore had said yesterday. That Voldemort could project his mind from his body and possess the snake was proof that the snake was a Horcrux. But Voldemort could also project his mind to attack Harry with legilimency, something that wasn't normally supposed to be possible with legilimency. He hadn't actually tried to possess Harry, to Hermione's knowledge, but Dumbledore had hinted that the threat was there. But could that mean that Harry himself was... It didn't make any sense. Voldemort had gone on and made another Horcrux after he came back. He wouldn't have done that if he already had 6. Unless he'd never found another Founder's artifact and he only had 5. But still, if it was inadvisable to make an animal into a Horcrux, surely it was infinitely more inadvisable to use a human who would be openly hostile to you. Unless he was worried about the prophecy and trying to ensure his survival through both of them. Voldemort himself was the only living witness who actually remembered that night, so there were a lot of unknowns there. But that didn't sound like his style at all. And no, it couldn't be! Voldemort had deliberately and unequivocally tried to kill Harry at least twice since that Halloween night, and maybe more times, and he never would have done that to his own Horcrux. He would have tried to capture him, curse him into insanity, or otherwise neutralize him without killing him. So Voldemort couldn't possibly have made Harry into a Horcrux. But then where did that weird connection between them come from? Dumbledore had never really answered that, and they'd just accepted it as a fait accompli. She didn't know any magic that remotely fit that description. Well, she wouldn't get anywhere with that. She'd need the time to research it, and she'd promised Septumah a visit this weekend. Crisis averted, she'd have to let it go for now. Septumah was a little more standoffish towards Hermione than she'd been in the past when she visited. "I'm sorry if I freaked out a little yesterday, Hermione," she said. "I thought your argument was well reasoned, and I certainly don't have a problem with you doing whatever you had to stay alive. I was very glad to see you were still in one piece. It's just that, well, this is one of those problems that Muggle-borns tend to have." Hermione frowned. "What do you mean?" "Discretion, and maybe perspective. Hermione, you can't say the words heart-stopping curse and not expect people to think of the killing curse or something close to it." "Oh," she said. In retrospect, it should have been obvious. "Sorry about that. I guess I was digging through medical textbooks so long that I didn't notice." "You really got this from the Muggle healers?" Septumah asked. "In a manner of speaking. I can show you what I did if you want." She pulled out a stack of parchment from her portfolio. "You'd share that with me?" she said in surprise. "After you wouldn't with Dumbledore?" "Honestly," she hesitated, "I don't fully trust Dumbledore anymore, Septumah." "You don't?" Septumah looked even more worried by that than the heart-stopping curse. "I trust his motives, of course, but I've disagreed with his methods several times this year, not just yesterday. I believe he's been too careless with the lives of others and has a bad habit of keeping important information to himself. That's why I took matters into my own hands and made those rings. But I do trust you. In fact, you're the only person I trust who would understand the implications of the arithmancy." "Oh, I'm flattered, Hermione, really. And to be honest, I'd feel more comfortable if I saw what you were doing so I could tell that it really wasn't dark." "It wasn't, or only a little," she confirmed, and showed her a sheet of parchment. "Here's the derivation." Septumah looked it over for a minute. "That really is the Sumerian strike hex. And the rest of it—" Her brow furrowed as she puzzled over the figures. But these are all time and space variables. They shouldn't have changed the effect. It shouldn't be any worse than a punch to the chest. How could this possibly be lethal?" "Commotio cordis. That's not just the incantation. It's the name of a medical condition in Muggle science. You see, the human heart beats by sending nerve signals to the muscles in a specific sequence. If an object like a cricket ball, a small ball used in Muggle sports, strikes someone in the chest under exactly the right circumstances, even without magic, it can interrupt the heartbeat and stop it. The only cure is to deliver a sizable electric shock to the heart to restart it. Without it, it's fatal in minutes." Septumah was agape. "I've never even heard of that," she said. "Muggles can actually die from that?" "Witches and wizards can die from it too," Hermione said defensively. "Otherwise it wouldn't have worked on Bellatrix Lestrange. Our hearts aren't substantially different. But it's incredibly rare. Only about 1 in 200,000 Muggles dies from it, so I suspect the wizarding world is too small to have ever recorded it." "But if it's so easy to die from it, why is it so rare?" Septumah asked worriedly. "Because normally it's not that easy. The blow has to hit at just the right place, at just the right angle, and at just the right time. There's only a period of 100th of a second during each heartbeat when the heart is vulnerable." "So that's what the space and time elements are for," she reasoned. "They slightly adjust the spell's speed and aim so it hits on target at the right time." "That's right." "But you said it went through Bellatrix's shield. How did you manage that?" Hermione smiled. "Quantum tunneling." She flipped to the next page. "Look here. Spells are basically waveforms, and if you actually know partial differential equations and wave mechanics, you can do some really interesting things. Like, when a sine wave hits a barrier, it can become an exponential decay function in the complex plane, and part of the energy can pass through it. It loses some of its energy, and it'll only go through one layer of shielding, but it works." Merlin's beard, Hermione! You invented a spell that just jumps across shields? That's normally pretty dark stuff too, but I've never seen it done like that. Would that work on other spells? No, this is the only spell I could find with an exact solution for it because the Sumerian strike hex is so simple, and because I was already using those time and space variables. That's a common problem in Muggle quantum mechanics too. So, just to be clear, you exploited something the body does on its own instead of making the spell do that? Yes. Okay, that is a little disturbing. Still, it's brilliant work, but it's disturbing. It's too bad you can't publish something like this, but I think it's for the best. And what were the other spells you used? The one I hit Mulciber with was simple enough. You remember how we were talking about fractal spells? Yes. I used one on a piercing hex, the two-dimensional Cantor set in the third iteration. That makes 16 smaller piercing hexes scattered over a wide area. Like Snape said, it is basically the same effect as a Muggle shotgun. Oh? I didn't know you'd got that far with that work. And you should be careful with that. That kind of maths hasn't been used in spellcrafting before. We don't really know what all the effects will be. Well, it's also not dark according to the basic magical criteria, if that's what you're worried about, Hermione said. It doesn't cause particularly intractable damage, and it doesn't require malicious intent to cast. But it can't be as simple to cast as an ordinary charm, can it? Septumah asked. It's not. But the mental state needed to cast a fractal spell is more transcendental, I guess. It was more important when I was teaching it to myself than using it in a fight, but with fractal spells you sort of have to train yourself to look past everything and gaze into the infinite, which, now that I say it out loud, sounds pretty scary by wizard standards, but I think Muggles have got a lot more used to that kind of thing over the past century. So you've told me, but I think I'm starting to understand. What about Dolohov, though? Hermione hung her head. That one was dark, she admitted. I thought I needed to invent a few darker curses because it's easier to bash through shields with them. I wasn't intending to use it in that way. It just sort of slipped out. Everyone gets angry sometimes, Hermione. You'd just lost a friend and you were in a fight for your life. I understand. But what did you do to him? She grimaced and answered, Epidermolysis bullosa. It's another medical condition. Normally a birth defect, and a bad one. It's also very rare, 1 in 20,000 live births. I don't know where the wizards get it or not, but if you know Greek and Latin, well, it causes the layers of skin to separate and rub against each other, causing it to blister and even slough off at the lightest touch. And if you think that sounds bad, it's much worse. I've seen photos. Septumah took a moment to process the implications. My God, she muttered, and with a stern voice told her, Hermione, that is not a spell you should be inventing, let alone using. Like I said, I meant it as a shield breaker, or at least that's what I told myself. I still feel better having it in my arsenal, but I understand I need to restrain myself. I'm afraid I have to agree with you there. You're a good person. Remember that. But this kind of stuff? I don't believe like Dumbledore does, but this worries me. You need to be careful not to cross a line you can't walk back, and I don't just mean unforgivable curses or something like that. Hermione suppressed the urge to roll her eyes. Septumah, I don't need to use unforgivable curses, she told her. I hope I won't need to use spells as dark as that one either. I may have been careless the other night, but I can find another way to do whatever I need to. All it takes is a little creativity. To her surprise, Septumah paled again. Hermione, you can be really scary sometimes, she said, apparently imagining what else she could do if she got really creative. Frankly, I don't know if I fully agree with you, but all I can say is, thank God you're on our side. Hermione spent the rest of the day flitting between various projects. She was disappointed that Septumah wasn't more supportive, but she tried not to let it get to her. And her whole ordeal had raised some good points. She needed more spells to fight the Death Eaters, and she needed more practice with the ones she had. She also needed to think more carefully about their strengths and weaknesses so she could choose them more wisely in a fight. She'd done that with the simpler ones, but not with the heavy curses. If she'd been more prepared at the Ministry, And besides that, she had a very difficult trigonometry problem that she would do well to solve this week before she left Hogwarts. She knew she would be having a very difficult talk with her parents, and she wanted to be in a better position to negotiate when she did. Wow, that really sounded wrong when she thought about it that way. Oh, and she also had to take her makeup muggle studies and history exams on Friday. She knew she was being absent towards her friends at supper. Her mind was preoccupied with thoughts of curses, Horcruxes, triangulation, and various other problems. The strangeness of Harry's connection with Voldemort was still nagging at her, like she'd forgotten something important, but she tried to dismiss it and focus on what her friends were saying. She could always get back to it later. Hermione, George interrupted her thoughts. Like her, the twins had been allowed to stay as visitors for the last week of term, although they weren't sure if they would stay all week. She turned to see him giving her a questioning look. Sorry, what? Are you okay? You've been distracted all night. I'm fine, George. I just have a lot on my mind. She really needed to be there more for her boyfriend, too. He'd just lost his best friend besides his twin. She shouldn't be so distant at a time like this. I'll tell you what. Tomorrow I'll take the day off and we can spend the day together. Really? You have time for that? He asked with genuine concern. I can make do. After all, if Voldemort stops us from living, then he's already winning. She thought of the prophecy again, but she tried not to let it show. Thanks, Hermione, you're the best, he said, and he patted her on the head. Don't do that, she said as he kissed her. After dinner, Hermione and her friends relaxed pleasantly in the common room, but it wasn't as jovial as it once was. News of Lee's death, not to mention Voldemort's return, had hit Gryffindor hard, especially with all the Quidditch fiends in her former house. The one bright spot was George and Fred plotting up an epic end-of-year prank in Lee's honor. She liked that idea. She thought it would be a fitting tribute, and it was good to see them keeping occupied. But she gave them a stern warning that if they disrupted her makeup exams, she'd use them as test subjects for her spells. After a while, she left them to their brainstorming and joined Harry, Ginny, and Ron, who were sitting in the corner having a hushed conversation about Horcruxes. She hadn't seen much of Ron and Ginny lately, and she wanted to try to make it up to them, too. I think he'd want to keep them close to him, Ginny said. Maybe he has them in a crystal casket in his basement like the Warlock's hairy heart. Nah, he's already doing that with his snake, Harry said, and he wouldn't keep them together. I figure he's got them hidden behind an impossible gauntlet of traps and monsters, Ron said. Horcruxes? Hermione said. They nodded. I don't know about that. Voldemort and Dumbledore are pretty evenly matched. If Voldemort can get through it, he might worry Dumbledore could too. Good point, Harry said. Say, Hermione, where would you hide a Horcrux if you were Voldemort? Harry asked. Harry, she said with a grimace, what kind of a question is that? Sorry, he said sheepishly, but it's something to think about. Where would Voldemort hide them? Do you have to keep saying his name? Ron demanded. Hermione rolled her eyes at him. I suppose it is, but from what Dumbledore said, I don't think I think much like him. Try and give it a go, though, Harry pushed her. Well, I guess I can try. If Dumbledore's right, and he wanted it someplace accessible to him, I'd hide something like that someplace only I could get to, she said. Like a bank vault, maybe. That way, other people would guard it without knowing about it. Or a safe only I knew the combination to. But I'd want something like that as far from my enemies as possible, like buried in a treasure chest on an uncharted island in the Caribbean, or... She paled suddenly. Or, God help us, under a Fidelis charm. But Harry shook his head. No, you can't be the caster and the original secret keeper, Harry said. He wouldn't want to let anyone else in on his big secret. Hermione stared at him in astonishment. What? I learnt all I could about the Fidelis charm after I found out what happened to my parents, he said. She laughed a little. Well, there you go, Harry. You think more like him than I do. Gee, thanks. Well, you're the ones who's supposed to beat him, aren't you? Still, I'm a little more worried about the fact that we don't fully know what we're looking for. Come to think of it, if Voldemort was planning to make his sixth Horcrux the night he killed you, what was he planning to use? Everything stopped. Suddenly, the last piece of the puzzle fell into place, and Hermione turned white as a sheet. Dumbledore believed Voldemort had planned to make his final Horcrux when he killed Harry as a baby. She didn't know how a Horcrux was made, and didn't particularly want to, but she guessed it involved a complicated ritual, plausibly one that had to be started before the murder. Maybe. She'd barely begun reading up on ritual magic. But what if Voldemort had begun the Horcrux ritual before he tried to kill Harry, and when his own body died, it complicated it? "No," she whispered. "What?" asked Harry. It couldn't be. Surely it was a mistake. And why wasn't Harry corrupted by dark magic? Although his mother's protection might have done that. But what was Dumbledore playing at if she was right? Have Harry win by sacrificing himself in the end? Well, that did sound uncomfortably like Dumbledore's style, only if he thought he was completely out of other options, but still. But why was he suggesting she teach Harry her spells then? Did he really think that strategy was any good, or was he just covering his bets? She didn't want to believe it, but it made so many things fit so perfectly, and the ones that didn't were at least plausible. "Hermione, are you okay?" Ginny asked. "You're staring again?" "Seriously, you okay there?" Ron said. I think I need to talk to Dumbledore." "What, now?" "Yes, Ronald." She got up to leave, but Harry followed her. "What is it? Did you think of something?" he asked. "Yes, no, maybe, but I need to talk to Dumbledore." "Hermione!" Ginny grabbed onto her arm. "Wasn't the whole point of this that we're a team now?" "I'll tell you, Ginny, but I'm not comfortable saying it until I confirm it with Dumbledore." "What's going on here?" George cut in as he and Fred intervened. "Nothing," she tried to say. "Hermione thought of something about you-know-who, but she won't tell us," Ginny said. "Ginny, I just want to talk to Dumbledore first, okay? I don't want to bring it up in case I'm wrong." "Why so secretive? Seriously, is it worse than you-know-who hiding a you-know-what with a Fidelis charm?" Ginny asked. "Yes, it's worse, Ginny. Just let me go." Ginny's grip slackened, and Hermione yanked her arm out of her grip and ducked out of the portrait hole before anyone else could stop her. For the third time that year, she went running up to Dumbledore's office. "Ginger Newts!" she snapped, gaining entrance. "Miss Granger, to what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked when he saw her. "Harry's a Horcrux, isn't he?" Dumbledore turned about as white as she'd ever seen him. She would have thought she'd announced she was going to the dark side. "Professor," she said. His silence was all the proof she needed. "Hermione." "He is, isn't he?" she demanded. "I was going to point out that your friends are behind you." Hermione spun around to see Harry taking off his invisibility cloak from himself and Ginny. "She's right, isn't she?" Harry said. "No," Ginny whimpered. No, she's wrong. She has to be." "Harry, I told you I wanted to talk to Dumbledore alone." "Well, it doesn't matter now," he said resignedly. "How did you even get your invisibility cloak that fast?" "I've been carrying it with me. Sirius said I should after what happened at the Ministry." "It was my idea," Ginny choked out. "Please tell me this is a sick prank." No one said anything. "Professor, tell her she's wrong." "Ginny," Harry said, pulling her face to him, "I think she's right." "No." "It makes so much sense."
"Harry, don't say that."
"Hermione's got it right, Ginny. I can feel it in my gut." He turned to Dumbledore. "It's true, isn't it, Professor?" Dumbledore gazed at him with a glimmer of tears in his eyes instead of his usual twinkle. "I am sorry you had to find out this way, Harry, but Hermione is correct. A fragment of Voldemort's soul is bound to you." Ginny let out a scream of rage and fear, and pulled out her wand, but Dumbledore waved his hand, not even drawing his own wand, and the next thing they knew, her wand was no longer in her hand, but on his desk. She lunged forward to grab it again, but Harry wrapped his arms around her and held her back. After a minute of fighting, she gave up and cried into his shoulder. Harry looked up at Dumbledore with a storm of emotions on his face. "So then, in order to defeat Voldemort for good, I have to die?" he asked. "I did not say that, Harry."
"You might as well have," Hermione snapped. "You said we need to destroy the Horcruxes to kill him. And you've been sitting on this for how long? After all the other times you've held back information you shouldn't have?"
"Do not think I have been idle, Hermione." Dumbledore suddenly became stern. "I have been searching for a solution for Harry. I had hoped that none of you would have to worry about the problem until I had solved it. We could have avoided all this anguish."
"So you haven't solved it," she said.
Dumbledore lowered his head a fraction. "No, I have not, though I do continue to search. You should know that there is one crucial difference between Harry and a true Horcrux." Ginny looked up at this, although it was still hard to tell if she fully understood what he was saying. "The soul fragment bound to you, Harry, is a Horcrux that Voldemort did not intend to make. Though he began the ritual, it was interrupted. The ritual was left incomplete, and the soul fragment that split off latched onto the only living thing left in your parents' house."
"Me," Harry said.
"Yes, but not in the same way as a true Horcrux. I am confident it is possible to remove it from you without killing you."
"But you haven't figured it out, though," Harry said. "And now Voldemort's back in the open, and we don't know how long we have to destroy all the Horcruxes before he catches on or takes over or something."
"And you don't know how!" Ginny hissed in anger. "You were just going to let Harry die!" "Miss Weasley, Save it! How long have you been looking? And you're going to be even busier with the war. What are the odds you're going to figure it out now?"
"Ginny, he's still the only chance I've got," Harry chided her, pulling her close.
She shook her head against his chest. "I'm not going to lose you, Harry. There has to be another way. Maybe Bill or Hermione!" She spun to face her other friend.
Hermione blinked in confusion. She was too surprised at seeing Ginny Weasley turn on Albus Dumbledore like this to pay attention.
"What?" she said. "Can you do it?" "Do what?" "Get the Horcrux out of Harry." "What? Ginny, I don't know the first thing about soul magic."
Ginny climbed off of Harry and approached her.
"Hermione, you're the most brilliant arithmancer in 100 years. You said yourself you can do things even you-know-who doesn't think are possible. If anyone in the world can figure this out, it's you." "But that's different. The unique things I've come up with, rearranging molecules, lasers, even a lot of my curses, they're all based on Muggle science. This is deep magic." "But haven't some of your papers been based off applying new maths to advanced magic?" "Some, I suppose."
Hermione was surprised Ginny was that familiar with her work.
"Probably my work on extension charms more than anything else." "Well, do it like that." "It's not that simple, Ginny. Look, if I knew exactly how a Horcrux was made, and if I spent the next year reading up on, I don't know, algebraic topography and differential geometry, then maybe—"
If she extrapolated from what little she knew about the outskirts of soul magic like the Patronus charm, that might actually be the right maths to approach the problem.
"Ha!" Ginny pointed at her. "You're already thinking about it, aren't you?" "But it could all be a wild Niffler chase, though," she insisted. "I can't even guess as to whether it would work. You take arithmancy, Ginny. You know that sometimes you do all the maths, and you find out that there's no solution, or there is one, but it's not a closed form you can calculate. It's better than nothing. I'd rather take the chance and give it a try. Wouldn't you, Harry?"
Well, obviously yes," he said, though he still looked pretty shell-shocked.
"There, you see? Hermione, you got Harry through the Triwizard Tournament alive. You got him out of the Ministry alive. You may not believe you can do this, but I do. So will you please try to help Harry one more time?"
Hermione closed her eyes. Even after all this time, she was touched that Ginny had such faith in her. She only wished she could live up to it. But she thought about it. Harry was going to die if Dumbledore couldn't find a way to remove the Horcrux from him, a promise that sounded hollow at this point. Could she really say no to doing everything she could to try to keep her best friend safe, even if it might be impossible? No, she couldn't.
"Yes, Ginny, of course I will." "Oh, thank you, Hermione," she squealed, throwing her arms round her neck. "I know you can do it. I really do." "I can't do it without help."
She turned back to face Dumbledore, who had been silent throughout this conversation, but had watched them with interest.
"Headmaster," she said,
If I'm going to be any help at all, I'm going to need to see those books that describe how a Horcrux is made. I won't even know where to start without knowing how the ritual works. Are you willing to do that for me?"
Dumbledore leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath.
"You must understand, Hermione," he said, "that I am wary of showing those books to anyone. Horcruxes are not the only dark magic described within, and any of those magics could do great harm in the wrong hands." "I do understand the need for secrecy, sir," Hermione retorted. "We've been focusing on that all year. And I'll understand if you don't believe I can help, but if you do, it's no use to keep me in the dark."
He regarded her carefully and seemed to weigh his words.
"I believe, as Miss Weasley said, if anyone can help Harry, it's you, Hermione. However, please understand my position as well. Even though you have made your position clear with respect to dark magic, it can be very treacherous, even to those with the best of intentions." "I'm sure it can, but if you really believe I have a chance at doing this, I need something to work with. Professor Dumbledore, twice this year I've come to you about keeping secrets that, directly or indirectly, harmed others. Harry and I both know occlumency now, so there's little danger in telling us, and if we're going to beat Voldemort, we need as much information as possible. Now, are you going to make it 3 times that you make this mistake, or are you going to let us help you?"
Dumbledore steepled his fingers and continued watching her carefully.
"I understand that you will need that information, Hermione," he said, "but I am asking you for 2 months. 2 months until the start of next term. If you are still planning to join my alchemy class, you will be returning to Hogwarts next autumn, at least part-time. You may use those 2 months to study those mathematical subjects you mentioned, and to teach Harry and your other friends any spells you see fit. Then, in September, we may begin examining the problem of Horcruxes together. I do not wish for you to start down this road alone, and I hope you will accept this compromise."
Hermione felt chagrined at having chastised him like that when he was merely offering her a different option. She glanced at Harry and Ginny, and when they didn't seem to hold any objection, she said,
"Oh, yes, I think that would be fine, Professor. Thank you." "You're quite welcome, Hermione, and I do hope we can find a solution together. Now, if you have no other concerns, I think we will speak again in September."
Professor," Harry said hesitantly, "do I still need to go back to my relative's house this summer?"
"I'm afraid so, Harry," he replied. "At least for the next 2 weeks. Until you are 17, your movements will be too easily traced, and you will need to have the blood wards at full strength in case of an emergency."
"I get it, sir," he said disappointedly, and Hermione started formulating a plan. The 3 left Dumbledore's office in silence, making the long trek back to Gryffindor Tower slowly.
"Thanks again, Hermione," Ginny said after a while. "Well, I couldn't just stay out of it," she said. "You know we'll have to tell your brothers, right?"
Ginny groaned loudly. None of them wanted to think about how that conversation would go. Ron would rant and rave, and the twins would take it really hard so soon after losing Lee. But they'd have to tell them just the same, and quickly. As soon as they got back to the common room, in fact, the other Weasleys noticed their somber expressions.
"What happened, mate?" Ron said at once. "Is it bad?" "Not here," Hermione said. "Can we go to one of your rooms?"
They went up to Harry's and Ron's room, where, after a little polite but firm convincing, they got Neville and Dean to step out so they could speak in private. "All right, so what did you 3 need to go running up to the headmaster for?" George asked. Hermione swallowed and said shakily,
"Well, we told you about the Horcruxes, but there was an extra one that Dumbledore didn't tell us about."
"An extra one?" Ron said in confusion. "But why wouldn't he tell you about that?" Harry looked the Weasleys in the eyes and said, "Because it's me." "What? No! You can't be! No, you're lying! Or Dumbledore's lying!"
"Boys!" Hermione cut in before they could get out of hand. "It's not a lie. He told us the whole thing."
After much protesting and ranting, they managed to convey the story to the 3 boys. They were horrified, of course, but they couldn't really deny it when it was all spelt out for them.
"But what does that mean, then?" Ron asked. "If we have to destroy all the Horcruxes to kill you-know-who, then does Harry?"
"I'll have to die,"
Harry said. "Harry, no!" Ginny insisted. "Unless we can get it out somehow, and Dumbledore doesn't know how," he said.
"Harry, don't talk like that. Hermione's going to be helping."
"I might as well admit it, Ginny. Hermione's brilliant, but there's still no guarantee it'll work. If we can't get the Horcrux out of me, I'll have to die to kill Voldemort. I don't know, maybe that's what the prophecy meant all along."
"I don't believe that," Ginny said. "Maybe you do, but I don't. I'm not giving up on you, Harry."
"Neither am I, mate," Ron said. "Us neither," the twins said in unison, and George added, "Besides, if Hermione's helping Dumbledore, there's no way they can fail, right?"
"Will everyone stop saying that?" Hermione snapped. "I'm going to do everything I can for Harry, but I have no idea if I can do this. She choked a little. "It's too much pressure if I fail."
She started to cry, too overwhelmed by everything, but George quickly grabbed her, took her up in his arms, and held her close to him. "It's okay," he whispered. "It's going to be okay, Hermione. No one's going to blame you if it's too much for you. We all still have faith in you, no matter what happens. We know you'll try your best."
"Thanks, George," she said with a hiccup. I just hope it's enough."
Hermione felt better after a night's sleep, albeit a restless one. If she was worried about the future before, it was even worse now. If she was the only person who could save Harry's life, it was too much pressure, despite her friend's reassurances. And worse yet, at the moment, she didn't even know whether her plan of attack was the right one. Right now, all she could do was take it one step at a time. She supposed she should be thankful that she was able to pull herself together enough to take her makeup exams on Friday. Her Muggle Studies exam was actually harder than she'd expected, just because the material was so out of date, but she was still very confident in her results. The history exam was also fairly difficult, but it was reportedly graded on an enormous curve because you exceeded expectations just by knowing the title of the textbook in Bin's class. The next day would be the train ride home, and the first of probably several very unpleasant confrontations with her parents. But before that, there was one thing left to do. The ritual she had worked out was a little tricky to set up. She had to carve the runes she needed and charge them in the castle, so she wouldn't be detected, but she had to perform it outside the wards of Hogwarts, exactly on the ley line between the castle and Hogsmeade. Or any ley line with runestones on it would do, but she knew where that one was. She snuck out of the grounds on Friday evening to do it. She had already used the Math Magician's map, her documentation of the anchor stones, and an astrolabe to determine true east from the Great Tower. When the time came, she didn't have to go far, just outside the castle gates, where she set up the wooden blocks she'd carved the runes into. It was perhaps fitting that Hermione had started studying the basics of ritual magic at the same time she'd learnt about the Horcruxes. According to an introductory book she'd found in the restricted section, all rituals, however minor, required a sacrifice. Sometimes there were additional provisos, like risking or wagering something else beyond the sacrifice itself, but there was always a sacrifice involved. That had been the real rub. The trigonometry had been easy, but figuring out what the consequences of her actions would be was much more difficult. Fortunately, when she did the maths, she found that what she wanted to do qualified as the most minor of rituals. She only needed to sacrifice her ability to be reachable by owl, and not permanently, but only for a month. Sooner was better than later in that case. She placed 5 pieces of wood carved with runes in a circle on the ground, 5 being the number of points needed to define a conic section, and stood in the middle of it. The runes were in 2 parts. The first part would cast an untraceability charm on the circle. Different from the unplottability charm, it was designed to block people from being magically tracked, again mainly by owl. Any wizard who went undercover used one as a matter of course. Otherwise, their enemies could find them just by writing them a letter. However, for a minor, it was more complicated. The trace overpowered any normal untraceability charm, so she had to use runes. The other set of runes was a weak space-distorting spell similar to the one she'd used for her heart-stopping curse. It would correct for minor misalignments to place her magical trace directly on the ley line. Once everything was in place, Hermione knelt down, placed the tip of her wand to one of the runes, and chanted "Non tracetere" 3 times. She felt a tingle as her location within the circle became untraceable.
She then closed her eyes and chanted "Tractera" 3 times. There was a loud crack, and a jolt of energy went through her like an electric shock as the charm deactivated. The trace tried to read her location again, but couldn't, snapping the slight tendril of magic connecting it to her and permanently dropping her from its monitoring. Unfortunately, owls wouldn't be able to find her either for the next lunar cycle until the residual effects wore off, but it was a small price to pay. Once she got home, she would be able to test her handiwork. Hermione had been holed up for most of the week, so she hadn't had the pleasure of running into Draco Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle during her time at the castle. Though they briefly saw each other, they didn't exchange words. That changed on the Hogwarts Express. The Slytherin trio, no doubt having waited all week to strike without teachers watching them, tried to corner her and Harry at the back of the train as they were searching for a compartment.
"You! There you are! You're dead, Potter! You and the mudblood!" Malfoy said.
"The mudblood has a name, Malfoy," Hermione said, rolling her eyes.
"Shut up, mudblood!" he hissed. "I'm going to make you pay for what you did to my father."
"Oh, so you've finally grown up?" Harry said sarcastically. "You're not going with 'my father will hear about this' anymore? Oh, wait, you can't, since he landed himself in prison."
"The Dementors have left Azkaban, Potter," Malfoy said. "Father and the others will be out in no time."
"Yes, but at least he can't pretend to be an upstanding citizen anymore," Hermione said lazily.
"My father is 10 times the wizard either of you will ever be."
Harry smirked at the trio. "Oh, yeah? Then how come he got his lights knocked out by a 16-year-old girl who was bound and gagged?" He tilted his head towards Hermione. Malfoy's hand flew to his wand, but both Harry and Hermione had anticipated his move and drew their own wands.
"Expelliarmus!"
"Impedimentia!" Malfoy and Goyle were out of the fight, but Crabbe wasn't bright enough to read the writing on the wall. He threw out a fairly nasty "Defodo," but Hermione shielded, and Harry hit him with another Expelliarmus.
"Any trouble here, Harry?"
It was Ginny, and Ron with her, coming out to see the commotion. Hermione looked around and saw other heads poking out of the surrounding compartments, some from the D.A., including, notably, the Greengrass sisters. "Just taking care of business, Ginny," Harry said.
"I don't know what you were thinking, Malfoy," Hermione said. "We already faced down actual Death Eaters, including your father. Do you really think that you lot will scare us any more?"
"You just wait, mudblood," the blonde Ponce hissed at her. "The times are changing now."
"Are they?"
"Yes, they are." Irrationally, he grinned. "When this is over, mudbloods like you won't be able to carry wands anymore, Granger, and the way things are going, even the unforgivable curses might not be illegal forever. How do you think you'll fare then?"
"Why, you little—"
Ginny yelled and lunged forward, but Hermione waved her back.
"Take it easy, Ginny," she said.
She still held her wand out.
"Should that day come, Malfoy, I'm confident I'll be able to defend myself. And not just with cutesy little jinxes."
"Oh, really? You might know a few tricks, but you couldn't cast an unforgivable curse if your life depended on it." Hermione cocked an eyebrow on him. There were enough wands on Malfoy that he couldn't move freely, so she could approach him.
"Is that supposed to be some sort of handicap?" she asked. "You haven't talked to Dolohov lately, have you? So let me tell you something."
She then leaned close and whispered in his ear. Suddenly Malfoy paled, and the hateful glare on his face vanished, replaced by a twinge of fear. She turned and walked away with a smirk and a toss of her hair.
"Whoa!"
she heard Daphne Greengrass say.
"What did she say? Granger, what did you say?"
Hermione smirked again. She'd let them imagine whatever they wanted unless Malfoy told them, but it looked like she'd certainly got to him with her little message.
"Anyone who resorts to unforgivable curses doesn't have an ounce of creativity."
Perhaps the ride home would be a pleasant one after all.